All right, welcome in. I'm the Kodiak, and today I'm here to talk about every division winner heading into the NFL season of 2024. The Hall of Fame game was tonight. Too bad it got cut short. But regardless, I was going to make a recap of that, but since I couldn't really do that, here is every division winner heading into 2024. And we'll start out with a team or a division where it seems like they have four of the most popular teams in the NFL. Let's start out with the NFC East. So I have the Eagles winning this division. It's always some law that the NFC East defending champion, cannot repeat going into the next year. And when I think about it, I think that just makes total sense for what's going to happen, just based on how good I think these teams are. So the Eagles, they are hungry to prove that 2023 was a fluke instead of 2022. And it's a valid question because in 2023, they had the best offensive and defensive coordinators in the league or in 2022, did I say 2022 or 2023? Either way, in 2022, that's what I meant. They had some of the best offensive and defensive coordinators in the league. Steichen and Gannon now are both head coaches who both performed very well in their first year with their new teams. And last year, they had Brian Johnson and Sean Desai, two guys who just could not do anything, two guys who were very, very responsible, bearing responsibility for the Eagles' total collapse. Like, no other way around it. It was a pretty embarrassing run of games they had there at the end of the season, which culminated in that disastrous wildcard loss to Tampa. But now you have Kellen Moore. Now you have Vic Fangio. So even if those guys aren't like great, Fangio is obviously one of the best defensive minds in the NFL or in NFL history. He has a ginormous tree. My one concern about Fangio is his defenses are very, very passive. I watched it up close and personal in Denver, and he relies very heavily on four-man fronts to get home. And hey, guess what? That is something the Eagles can do. But hopefully the front seven plays better than it did in the back half of last season. And obviously, Kellen Moore, two fan bases in the Chargers and Cowboys that have not been sad to see him go, even though he was one of the NFL's rising coordinators a couple of years ago. But yeah, we'll see how he does as the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. So with the Dallas Cowboys, their roster has good high-end talent, but I'm concerned elsewhere. Yeah, you have guys like Parsons, Diggs, Bland, and everything like that, but you have a lot of questions on the defensive side of the ball. You've lost a couple key pieces there, and especially when I look at the offense, who do they have besides CeeDee Lamb? Yeah, Ferguson's kind of decent. Same with Brandon Cooks at this point in his career, but he might very well be pushed over the old man cliff. And Michael Gallup retired, so that kind of takes that out of the equation as well. Maybe you could get a Tolbert breakout, and that could really go a long way with things. But this team virtually has no running game. Worst running back room in the league. Still a young offensive line that they're trying to rebuild and retool. And this is Dak's last year in Dallas, and I can honestly kind of see the team just not really being cohesive. And honestly, I don't think Dak has that fire to be like, all right, guys, let's do it. And Mike McCarthy definitely is not going to show you that fire. And the Giants, they have a really, really tough mountain to climb with Daniel Jones as their quarterback because there are a lot of things I like about the Giants. I do like the fact that they tried, at least, to improve the offensive line in free agency. I do like the fact that you supposedly got Daniel Jones a wide receiver one so that he has no excuses at the end of the year. I mean, he had no excuses anyway because he sucks, but, uh, behind Malik Neighbors, you have Wan'Dale Robinson, and that's kind of it. But on the defensive side of the ball, complete different story. So it remains to be seen how Bowen from Tennessee does with the Giants, but not really impressed by the results over there the past handful of years. The main thing that excites me about the Giants, if there is anything to be excited about, is that front seven. You have Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, and Dexter Lawrence on the same defensive line to go along with Bobby Okereke, and in the secondary, you got the bench closed. I could see this team going on a bit of a run. I could see this team kind of playing spoiler, but nah, it's just not happening. And then the Commanders, I like the Jaden Daniels pick. I like the fact that Adam Peters wanted to bring in some guys for culture, but ultimately, not really happy with the Dan Quinn hire. Not really happy with the Cliff Kingsbury hire. So of GM, head coach, what's the other thing that's really important? GM, head coach, quarterback. I think they only got two of those three right. And unfortunately, if you don't have a head coach, you cannot go very far in the NFL. But they also have Cliff Kingsbury running their offense, and oh man, it's just really interesting because I don't think Jaden Daniels is like an air raid quarterback. If Kingsbury decides that he is going to run the air raid with Jaden Daniels, like yes, he plays very similar to Kyler Murray, but that was not a scheme that he ran in college. But the Commanders, they just have a little ways to go, in my opinion. And Dan Quinn, I hope that he can kind of just be a transitional coach, and I hope they can get the shiny new coordinator next year, and then Dan Quinn will be out the door. NFC North, Lions, with the Bears actually being a wild card team. So this is the only team division that I had every team finishing above 500 in, because when I think about the Vikings 2 years ago, I was really high on them. And that was when the Packers still had Aaron Rodgers in 2022, and they were losing like a key starter every single day in free agency. But now, coming into this year, I've been dead on the Vikings over the past few years. I've just been like, okay, last year, 2022 was kind of a magical run, but they still should be good and improve defensively. But I have a lot of questions about their offense. And coming into this year, and that proved to be dead on. And then this year, I'm just like, okay, they have some QB issues. Like, yes, JJ McCarthy is the guy who you supposedly took to be your quarterback in the future, and you took him to be your franchise QB, and that's completely fine. But how long of a leash do you give Sam Darnold? Because Sam Darnold, he has not shown to really be worth anything in the NFL. Like, yeah, he could still have like a Geno Smith type year, but usually when a player sucks for the first 5 years of his career, it's usually not the norm for them to become good in their sixth. And honestly, I'm kind of bearish on Kevin O'Connell, meaning I'm not really sure he's that good of a coach because he has his clear positives. There are a lot of pros to having him be the head coach of your football team, but there are also a lot of cons that I think really come to light during certain games that the Vikings play. They don't really have any idea on how to scheme a rushing attack, or at least Kevin O'Connell's staff has not really shown the propensity to do that. And also, with Sam Darnold and JJ McCarthy, that's a big QB downgrade, at least this year with McCarthy. It remains to be seen how good he will actually end up becoming. But you shouldn't expect, from what Cousins have given you the past few years, you shouldn't expect to get anything better from that. And then I didn't even talk about the other two teams, or three teams. So the Lions, they have a stout team on both sides of the ball. And my main concern coming into this year for the Lions was their secondary, but it looks like they've really beefed it up. It looks like they really shored it up heading into next year, so that's great. They used their first two picks on Arnold and Rakestraw, so they should be better in one of the only areas where I thought the team actually needed to improve. So yeah, all it remains to be seen is let's get some things to go our way and let's make another run. The Bears, they finally have a loaded team to complement a great QB prospect. So this is a huge, huge make or break year for Eberflus. And I don't think he's a very good coach at all. But I think this roster is very, very talented. And I think that they can build on the momentum that they had in the second half of the year. And I think that's completely valid. And I think a lot of people would agree with that statement because you're throwing Caleb Williams in probably one of the best situations a first overall pick could ever go to. Like, if you are a first overall pick, yeah, usually you're going to a team with a bad offensive line, with bad weapons, with a bad defense. The Bears have none of that. The Bears, they added, obviously, DJ Moore last offseason, Rome Odunze in the draft, and Keenan Allen via trade in the middle of the free agency period. And then they added Gerald Everett, too, and you have Cole Kmet there. But what revitalized this team at the end of last season was the Montez Sweat trade, because after that, the Bears defense started playing like a top 10 unit throughout the entire NFL, and you are going to get a massive upgrade in QB play. Like Caleb Williams, he has a lot to live up to with the college hype, and he had a lot of people that were not excited for him, and there were a lot of people in my comment section in February when I said that Fields sucked. I said there were a lot of Bears fans that were mad that they landed on Caleb Williams, and I don't think anyone's going to be mad once you see how sick this guy actually is on the field. But my other concern relies with the Green Bay Packers. The offense will be good, and it's still a young unit. Like, they ended last year pretty great, but now it's your time to fully show what you can do over a 17-game span. Now it's your time to, okay, we had a half season that really, really started clicking and started, we're going to use that as a launch pad to our next season. But I have questions about Halfley at defensive coordinator because he was the coach at Boston College, and there wasn't really a lot that we liked on the defensive side of the ball there. So it was kind of a confusing hire. I thought they were really going to look inside their organization just because of the way that team is set up. I honestly thought they were going to look inside the NFL more than anything else and not go to the ACC. But, whatever. I'm not the one making those decisions. They do have a lot of talent on the defensive side of the ball. I will say that. I believe they're starting 9 or 10 former first-round picks there this offseason. So, yeah, should be pretty good there. NFC South, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This division has the potential to be extremely sad. So let's start out with the team that I think is going to win the division anyway. So Liam Cohen, he must ease the questions people have about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And you lost Dave Canales, who did a great job at revitalizing Baker Mayfield's career. Obviously, you have Evans, who is just going to hit 1,000 yards every season until the wheels fall off. You have Godwin. You have some guys who took steps forward last year, like Rashad, who really showed his receiving chops, and Trey Palmer as well. But what I think this ultimately goes back to is stability. Because a lot of people on this Buccaneers roster, they have big game experience. They went far with Brady in the Super Bowl. And even though you've added quite a few new faces and maybe the skin and bones of the team isn't there anymore, you still have a lot of reliable veterans who were there when you did go that far. So ultimately, that's just what I think is going to happen. I think Bowles will have this team. He's a decent head coach. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he's a world beater. I don't think he's an exceptionally talented coordinator or coach or anything like that. But he is stability, and this is a division with a lot of instability. Falcons, Raheem Morris was a very puzzling hire. He had a really bad record as a head coach. Now, granted, that was a long time ago, so coordinators and coaches can develop just like players can. But man, oh man, his past resume, 17-31 all-time win-loss record as far as coaches, as far as when he was the head coach, doesn't bode well for him. But hopefully the offense is good, and I think the offense will be good because you have Kirk Cousins throwing to Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, and Drake London, and you have a good offensive line to back up Kirk Cousins. And if you have a mobile quarterback or a quarterback who is about 35, 36 years old, you need an offensive line that can just whoop the other team's defensive line. Speaking of a team with a 30-year-old quarterback that does not have that is the Saints. And I think we're going to look at a huge, huge collapse this year. And here's why. You lost Ramczyk for the year. And of a lot of offensive line rankings I have looked at, granted, I'm not an expert in offensive line play or anything like that. If you ask me, to name a random starter on any team's offensive line, yeah, I could probably get one or two, but I can't name all five. I definitely can't name all five. But what I do know is that the Saints offensive line, from what I've looked at this year, is going to be potentially disastrous without Ryan Ramczyk. You added Fuaga, obviously you have McCoy, Ruiz, but now you're going to have to start Trevor Penning, and now he's going to have to prove that he is not a bust. But even then, Derek Carr was not good last year until the month of December, so it was too little too late. They came out flat in big games. Dennis Allen was very, very out-prepared and out-coached in a lot of those contests, and ultimately, it's just going to be a matter of, is your defense still going to stick together? Because if your defense, who has a lot of aging pieces, like Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, they're not getting any younger. Matthews up there in age too. And Lattimore's kind of at the age where we got to be wary of cornerback play and just, ask if he's still going to be playing at a high level. Yeah, so that's why I think the Saints, we could really, really see a tough year for them. Now, with the Carolina Panthers, success this year is not measured by wins and losses whatsoever, because you gave up a haul for Bryce Young last year, and you finished 2-15. So whatever you do this year, it's going to buy Canales time. It's going to buy Dan Morgan time. It's going to buy a lot of people in that organization time. And just based on what you gave up to get Bryce Young, you cannot let that pick fail. You are going to surround him with everything he can to succeed. They did a pretty solid job, all things considered, in trying to aid Bryce Young. I did the couple additions to the offensive line. I did like the fact that they were able to get Deontay Johnson for absolute dirt cheap from the Pittsburgh Steelers. But there are a lot of things where I look at this team and I'm just like, okay, on the defensive side of the ball, you lost Brian Burns. Luckily, Ejiro Evero, he's a great coordinator. He's probably going to get some head coaching interviews at the end of this year, just like he did last year. I believe he interviewed for Seattle before ultimately went to McDonald. But yeah, once again, success this year, it's just not measured by wins and losses. If you go 4-13 and you see that Bryce Young definitely makes steps up, and even if your defense is allowing like 25 points a game or something like that, even though the defense typically is pretty good in Carolina, like over the past few years, the defense has been pretty solid. So I don't expect that to happen. But what I'm trying to say is that the bar for improvement is very, very low. And if you go 4-13, 5-12, I think a lot of Panthers fans, yeah, they'd be disappointed, but I don't think any of them are expecting a Super Bowl or anything like that. Now, the NFC West. So we're going with the San Francisco 49ers, with the Seahawks being a wild card team. So the 49ers are still the class of the NFC, and I did really like their draft, and I genuinely believe they got better. Unfortunately, Pearsall does have a injury. I don't remember exactly what it is. So that is something to keep an eye on, and it is something to keep an eye on to see if Ayuk is actually going to be on this roster come week 1. A lot of people think he is, but man, oh man, the news and reporting has been bad. I don't think it was ever this bad with Deebo Samuel. Like, yeah, Deebo requested a trade, but Ayuk, something has happened, and I don't think he wants to be there. And if it was true that the 49ers told him that they don't want him there, then all right, well, nothing they can do about it. Because he's one of the top 10 receivers in the NFL, in my opinion. No holes to his game. And losing him would hurt a lot, definitely. But I do think they got better at pretty much every position that they needed to. The Seahawks, they're getting upgrades at head coach and in the trenches as well. So first of all, let me speak to head coach. Pete Carroll, he was a good coach, at least at one point, but he was still, for the modern NFL, he was kind of limited. And I don't think anybody is going to disagree, because the Seahawks, they had a bizarre identity over the past few years. Bad offensive line, team that always ran the football, and team that always played pretty tough, but sometimes, and they did win more games than they lost, but a lot of Seahawks football was just very frustrating in general. And in the trenches, you had one of the worst defensive lines in the league last year. So hopefully you get one of your young edge pieces to step up, and you did add Byron Murphy in the draft, which is going to be fantastic. You still have questions on the offensive line. You still have questions as to, if Cross can play up to his draft stock, if Lucas can be good once again. But, it remains to be seen. And I am liking what this team is building, just because Geno Smith, he will have you playing in some shootouts. He will have you, he's a plus game manager, meaning okay, for 13, 14 games a year, you should probably expect him to be a game manager. But man, 3 to 4 that the Seahawks have had over the past 2 years, he slings the rock like no one can, I swear. And ultimately, I think that will be good enough. I think the rest of the roster is good enough for that to be just basically what puts them over the top. Now, the Rams concern me because Stafford is on borrowed time. He had that elbow thing last year, and it clearly did not impact him. But again, he's not getting any younger. Maybe McVay is on borrowed time too. I know he did shut down some reports last year that he was considering going into broadcasting. And I mean, if you're going to make the same amount of money without living the rigorous life of an NFL head coach, I don't necessarily blame you for that. But it just remains to be seen, what is the drive to win? Because they've already won a Super Bowl, and last year was kind of their rebuilding year. And Stafford and McVay, they did a great job elevating this team. So even if the roster is not that stout, you can still get a lot of guys who can be coached up just from the fact that you have Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay there. Now, you did lose Morris, so it remains to be seen how the defensive line, or how the defense in general, looks under Shula, I believe his name is. And yeah. Now, the Cardinals, they'll be a fun team, and they will be a hard team to play against. Like last year, they had that early Dan Campbell energy, as I've talked about, but they still need a few more pieces before I really take them seriously. And I do think that they have a valid claim to not only just make a wild card, but make a push at the San Francisco 49ers and ensure that they have a tougher route to the playoffs. So the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills, they will always have this division, and it is because of one player. I'm not a believer in Sean McDermott as a coach. Every big game that the Bills have played in, every good regular season game that goes back and forth, and the Bills need to face a little adversity, it seems like they have come out uh, on the bottom rather than on top more often than not over the past few years, which just isn't good. It's just not good to think about. And there's one guy keeping this team afloat. Like, that's just the way I see it. You cut a bunch of guys on the defensive side of the ball because, you had cap constraints. And I think that their Super Bowl window is close shut. I think last year was kind of their last year that they could truly make a run at it. And even if I don't think this team is going to win the Super Bowl or get past the divisional round, uh, that they've only shown a propensity to be able to do once, you have Josh Allen. And Josh Allen is going to make amazing plays. He is going to elevate the team. They're going to elevate him. Now, what I'm curious about is, are they going to lean on the run game a little more? And I think that's going to be what ultimately happens for the Buffalo Bills. I think they started winning last year when they put the ball in James Cook's hands rather than Gabe Davis's hands. So, yeah. Now, the Dolphins, they did everything they could to win the division last year. The Bills were kind of floundering. The Bills were 500 at the end of November. And the Dolphins, they just needed to work hard to quiet the big game and cold weather noise, because last year would have been as good as any for the Dolphins to win the division. You had great offensive performances, especially in the first half of the year. It just looked like everything was set up for this team to go absolutely insane last year. But what happened? You got swept not only by the Bills, but you lost some really, really big games. You lost against the Ravens handily. You completely blew it against the Titans. And obviously, you had those losses against the Bills. Now, what I will say about the Jets is, why is this team, why are people still talking about it like it's a playoff team? Extremely overrated. I just don't know how you can look at 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers coming off the Achilles that I've mentioned ad nauseum on this channel all offseason. I'm saying, okay, guys, we need to pump the brakes a little bit. And the offense is still being run by Nathaniel Hackett. You still have Nathaniel Hackett, Todd Downing, and Carter as your coaches on the offensive side of the ball, three of whom were the worst coaches in the NFL, worst offensive coaches in 2022, and now they're on the same offense. So it's just not inspiring. I don't really know why people keep talking themselves into this, because, yes, you have two very good skill position players of Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, but Mike Williams has never been healthy. Yeah, sure, Malachi Corley could be something, but it remains to be seen. Maybe someone steps up behind Breece Hall. I was a big Abanikanda guy in draft season, but this team should not be at minus odds to be a playoff team. I think anybody talking themselves into that is just purely delusional, even if the defense is going to be fire. So the Patriots, they're building something nice, and they need more time. Now, I think it's going to be really refreshing for fans of the New England Patriots to just be like, okay, we're finally getting some good offensive talent. We're finally getting some good skill position players. We are finally looking to those guys like Demario Douglas and Javon Baker and Jalen Polk, and we finally have hope with our offensive talent, which is something that's been sorely lacking from this team over the past few years. And Bill Belichick did a horrible job of leaving them in a position with some good offensive talent. But they've done a pretty good job at revitalizing it and retooling it, and I thought they got an absolute steal in Javon Baker. So once again, they are building something nice, and I do enjoy the fact that, Drake May, he's going to go to a situation that should, in theory, be at least decent, because you have, a rebuilding offensive line, so I'm not really excited about that. But the defense, they still should have some of their Belichickism in there. So this team could surprise some people and win some games, but ultimately, I do think they need more time, unless Drake May is just so much better than we thought coming out, which would be scary to think about. And yeah. So the AFC North, with the Cincinnati Bengals and the Ravens as a wild card team. Now the Bengals, they will go as far as Burrow can take them, and pretty far, I bet, because if Burrow can play the full year, you know what he can do. He can lead you to a Super Bowl, and he can almost win you one. At least that's what he was able to do against Stafford and McVay's Rams 2 years ago. And they made the AFC Championship the year after with a duct tape offensive line. And the fact that they tried to cheap out on the offensive line was really embarrassing. And I think this is the year that it really all comes together for the Cincinnati Bengals. Sorry, I had something on me. Um, but yeah, I do think the Bengals are going to go pretty far this year. Now, the Baltimore Ravens, people are just going to look at that and be like, okay, this team had one of the best regular seasons of all time last year and is now one of the best teams ever to not win the Super Bowl. And to that, I say, okay, they lost Mike McDonald and they lost a bunch of free agents. Like Patrick Queen, you did lose, I think, like Zeitler and Simpson on the offensive line and someone else that I can't remember. And yes, this team is still going to be good, but how much in the tank does Derrick Henry have? I know a lot of people are really excited about Derrick Henry to Baltimore. He's a 29, 30-ish year old running back, so you kind of got to be wary there, depending on what you want to think. But uh, losing a bunch of those free agents, it's going to hurt big time. And it's going to hurt big time when you lost your coordinator that absolutely teed off on opposing offenses last year, particularly in the Shanahan scheme. Now, I did see something that was pretty interesting. I was looking at how the Ravens were going to adapt to the loss of Mike McDonald, and a lot of people were just like, well, their defense, they just generated a lot of turnovers, and, to the fault, to credit Mike McDonald as well, that was very true, but they still allowed a lot of yards in those games. And you know what? I'm not going to entirely disagree. We'll see how they look. I definitely think like this is still one of the best teams in the AFC. It's just unfortunate that they're in a very, very strong division. And the Steelers roster, it's lacking quality. Like I'm not excited about a QB room, at least heading into next year, of Justin Fields and Russell Wilson. Justin Fields, he could still develop. He could still be a good player in this league. Uh, he's shown a few highlight runs over the past few years. He's shown that he has an absolute cannon. But man, oh man, is he a bad processor. Like week 2 against Tampa last year, one of the worst QB performances I have ever seen. But you now get him mentored by Russell Wilson. I think Steelers fans are pretty happy with how that has all turned out because Matt Canada is not your offensive coordinator anymore. And you don't have to deal with him calling like negative 3 yard runs anymore, uh, up the gut on 3rd and 10. Like it's just not going to happen. But this team, they will always go above 500, despite what you think about. Oh, they may not have the talent, they may not have what they once had. Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. It's going to be a pretty solid RB duo. So yeah, I think they're really going to lean on that. And then you have Rusty Pickens. Russ, he still throws a great deep ball. He's not like actually a good quarterback anymore, but he throws a great deep ball. And Pickens, he can, we know him. He can make insane catches. So I do think that's going to be a special connection this year. But Mike Tomlin, man, no matter what the Steelers look like even if they're 4-6 heading into week 11 or week 12, depending on if they've had their bye or not, they're going to finish the year above 500. Like, it's just going to happen. So with the Browns offense, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions as to if Deshaun Watson can be the same player that we saw in Houston. I have a lot of questions as to if Nick Chubb is even going to be the same running back, and I don't think he is. I think he's lucky that he can still walk, all things considered. But yeah, the offense has a lot of questions to answer. And the defense was great last year. I think and the defense, they played lights out at certain points last year. So I do believe that they still have one of the best defenses in the league. Ultimately, though, I think their offense is just going to let them down too much. With the AFC South, I have the Texans winning division and the Colts making the wild card round. And this is just nothing more than just a bunch of guys. They finally have another year of their window being open. And, it's just another year for this young core to click. You just extended Nico Collins this offseason. You added Tank Dell the third last year. You added Stephon Diggs, even though I think he could contribute at least, but nobody should be expecting him to be the same player that he was in Buffalo. But ultimately, yeah, that's just what it is. This is another year of just a strong infrastructure staying in place. GM, head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, everything is staying in place. And obviously, you have number 7 back there. So one thing I would like to see the O-line step up, and I would like to see Kenyon Green take a step up and play up to his draft stock that the Texans thought they were getting when they drafted him 14th overall, 11 picks behind Stingley in 2022. Now the Colts, they have a very scary head coach and QB pairing with Shane Steichen and Anthony Richardson. And Shane Steichen is one of the top 3 run schemers in the NFL, and you just gave him one of the best size-adjusted athletes the sport has ever seen. So, yeah, 6'4", 250, and runs a 4.45. Like, even if he doesn't take a step forward as a passer, like, you are just going to have to respect his rushing ability right next to Jonathan Taylor, right behind the third ranked by PFF offensive line coming into this year. So I expect the defense to be bad, and that's why I don't have them winning the division. But I do think their offense is going to be really, really good, especially running the ball. So the Jaguars, I don't think they got much better on the offensive side of the ball. Brian Thomas Jr. was a great addition. Don't get me wrong, but I just have a lot of question marks. I have a lot of question marks as to what this team's, uh, offensive coaching is going to look like. Because Doug Peterson, he is one of 7 active head coaches to have won a Super Bowl, which is a very impressive feat in itself. But it looks like Frank Reich and a few other guys may have had more of a hand in that than we previously wanted to admit. And you know what? Nothing wrong with that. You got your ring. But then you went to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he is destroying his career just to get Prescott Taylor some offensive coordinator play calling experience and duties. Like, I don't understand what they're doing in that regard. You can only call so many screens on 3rd and 12. And ultimately, there's this roster, it's talented, it is, but sometimes they're just outperformed and sometimes they're just outclassed, and that's going to be the nature. This division is better than it's ever been. So the Titans, they have Will Levis. I'm not a fan of Will Levis. I don't think he's very good, but he could be good, and he's a gunslinger. I think he's going to play like a gunslinger. He is going to be like a Jameis Winston, a diet Jameis Winston, but not as good in my opinion, because he's going to throw for a lot of yards. I expect him to throw for a lot of touchdowns, and I expect him to throw a lot of interceptions. By far, the most highest turnover-worthy play percentage in the league last year. Not most turnover-worthy plays. That wouldn't be fair to judge just because he didn't start a full year. But you have a very strong infrastructure in place on the offensive side of the ball. DeAndre Hopkins, unfortunately, we just learned is going to be missing 4 to 6 weeks. Hopefully he's good to start week 1. But yeah, so there's a lot of questions to answer with the Tennessee Titans as well. Not a fan of Levis, but hopefully he proves me wrong. AFC West, the Kansas City Chiefs with the Raiders as a wildcard team. So the Chiefs, they have won the Super Bowl the past 2 years, and they may have an explosive offense again. So in 2022, they won the Super Bowl on the backs of their offense. And last year, they won it on the backs of their defense. And they finally added receivers again. So just based on the fact that they didn't have any receivers over the past 2 years and they still won the Super Bowl, that's a huge testament to Reed, Veach, and Mahomes. And just imagine what they can do now that they actually have receivers. So yeah, the Raiders defense, they ended the year extremely well last year with Pierce. And I expect that to continue going forward. Even if they're starting Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, that wasn't an issue in the back half of last season. They had this team playing like Raiders again, which is something that has been sorely missing from this team and from their identity. Like, you move to Las Vegas and you suck all the life and passion out of the team and fan base. But last year, it felt like they were Raiders above all else, which is something that I have not said in a long time, probably since the first time they moved to Las Vegas. So I think the silver and black off the backs of their defense are going to have a pretty good year, and I think they're going to make the wild card round. So the Chargers, this team, I look at it and I'm just like, okay, I was going to be one of those other fools that just hyped up the Chargers in the offseason. I was just like, okay, they've got a lot of great pieces. They have a head coach. They have a great franchise quarterback. But unfortunately, your franchise quarterback has plantar fasciitis. So their season's over. Like, this is literally Burrow last year all over again. If you have a bet on the Chargers to win the division, cash it out. If you have a bet on them to make a wild card spot, cash it out, because no matter how good the rest of the team plays, and I expect them to play a lot better with Jim Harbaugh as their coach. You do have Greg Roman as your offensive coordinator, and he is good in his first year when he's at a new situation, and I expect them to be good running the football, even though they have a really weak running back room. I mean, you have Gus Edwards for the goal line, and you have J.K. Dobbins, who health has been an absolute joke in regards to him, and who else do they add? Kollmann NFL, somebody I really liked coming into the draft, and I think the Chargers got an absolute steal in the 5th round. By the way, Kollmann NFL, my favorite fantasy sleeper of 2024. But the Chargers QB, Justin Herbert, revealed today that he has plantar fasciitis. So you look at what happened with Burrow last year, not good. The Broncos roster, it's just not good. There's a lot of areas where I think they're just massively, severely under-talented, even though Sean Payton's a good coach. Uh, Despite the fact of what everybody wants to think, the fact that he dragged that horrible roster to an 8-9 finish last year was an absolute masterpiece and one of the best coaching jobs, I think, throughout Sean Payton's entire career. But the Broncos roster is bad. Like, there's a few guys that you can look at and be like, okay, you have Quinn Myers, you have Patrick Surtain. Those guys are bona fide above average players in the NFL. And then what about the other 20 starters? Like, it's just bad. It's just bad all around. Bo Nix, he could be good, and that's the only way I see this team making noise is if Bo Nix is somehow better than we expect them to be. And I wouldn't rule that out, but ultimately I don't expect anything from the Broncos. So yeah, that does it for me. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.